Hey book readers! The heat in Texas this month was brutal. I think nearly every day was over 100 degrees. It was absolutely ridiculous. But on the bright side, the crazy high temps meant I was forced to stay inside and read a lot. Today, I'm taking a moment to share some thoughts about the 9 books I read this month. The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson. This book is heavily influenced by Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but not as funny. In fact, I kind of found the narrator slash protagonist annoying. And honestly, I think I enjoyed the excerpts from the titular book more than I did the actual story. Like, why it's unlikely you'll be traveling to a parallel universe filled with talking bananas. I end up wanting more of that, and less of the main character slowly working his way out of time travel amnesia. This was the most disappointed I've ever been in a Brandon Sanderson book. It was so underwhelming that it was a do not finish, DNF for me. I gave up reading it halfway through. I mean, life's too short to waste reading books that you dread reading. Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. This might be the year of T.J. Klune for me, as this is the 3rd book of his I've read so far, and I plan to read one more, hopefully. Under the Whispering Door introduces us to Wallace Price, a lawyer who's too focused on money and status to form relationships or feel much of anything for anyone. Then he dies, becomes a ghost, and is taken by his reaper to a quaint tea shop. It's here at this way station that he meets his ferryman, Hugo, who tries to help Wallace come to peace with his life before he walks through a door and into whatever comes next. Wallace's growth, therefore, becomes the focus of the book. As a band of living and dead misfits at the tea shop transforms into a family for Wallace, he learns to live and love more in death than he ever did in life. I'm going to give this one 4 dog ears. It's heartwarming but predictable. And it didn't have the same laugh-out-loud humor that I've come to expect from a Klune book, although it might have the most heart, with The House in the Cerulean Sea coming in a close second. Permafrost by Alastair Reynolds. I enjoyed reading Aversion so much that I decided to pick up another book by Reynolds, this time a novella. It sounded promising, a time travel story set in 2080 when the Earth has no more plants or animals, and the only way to solve this problem of climate change is by sending an elderly woman 50 years into the past. Unfortunately, it didn't live up to my expectations, so I'm going to just give it 3 dog ears. This was an imaginative sci-fi story that builds momentum as it goes, but I didn't connect enough with the characters for Permafrost to really hook me. Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville. I first heard about this novella about a decade ago from a coworker who couldn't believe I'd never read it. Well, now I can officially say that I have. Written in 1853, Bartleby the Scrivener certainly shows its age. And what I mean by that is that I had to look up certain words in the dictionary multiple times while I was reading it. So I felt lost at some points and probably had certain references go over my head. The gist of the story is a lawyer hires a new clerk who starts off working hard, but then suddenly just refuses to do any work, simply saying to any request, "I would prefer not to." Soon enough, Bartleby is living in the office and mostly just staring off into the distance. And his lawyer boss can't seem to get rid of him, so he eventually gives up and moves offices. But the new tenants of the office are complaining to him about Bartleby always being there. Bartleby is then arrested and thrown into prison, where he decides that he would prefer not to eat. I'm going to give this one 3 dog ears. It was a quick story with some bits of comedy gold, but will I ever reread it? Well, as Bartleby says, I would prefer not to. The Broken Sword by Paul Anderson. This epic classic of the high fantasy genre moves along at a lightning-fast clip. I mean, you get a dramatic backstory of a Viking boy getting swapped out for an elf changeling, and each of them growing up in just a handful of pages. The problem I had with it was that I didn't know who exactly to root for. I felt just as bad for the human who got stolen from his family as the fish out of water elf who grows up in a family where he never feels he belongs. So I'm giving it 4 dog ears. I mean, this book boasts legendary weapons, dramatic battles between elves and trolls, plus a healthy dose of incest, if that's your thing. But what I really enjoyed was one of the main characters, Scofflock, the human, went into his Shakespearean monologues. These quick poems were so great, and they showed that Paul Anderson had some serious chops. Lord of the Flies by William Golding. After talking about this book in a recent video about which high school books I'd rather reread, I got the itch to read it again. And I wish I wouldn't have scratched that itch. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad, and it has a special place in my heart because it's the first book I remember enjoying so much that I'd read it in class, but the 15-year-old me was different than the 35-year-old me. Past me romanticized surviving in the wilderness, hunting feral pigs, and blowing conch shells like an island-bound Viking calling an assembly. Present me likes bubble baths, Uber Eats, and going to bed early. Gosh, I'm so soft. Seriously, y'all, reading this book is so frustrating. It's like cheering for a stalled car on a railroad to get off the tracks, as a train is barreling toward it. You want so badly for these British boys to stop being prepubescent little jerks, start working together and prioritize the right things, but it just ain't gonna happen. 3 dog ears for this one. It's a more basic story than I remembered, with some tense moments that still keep me on the edge of my seat as I read them for the dozenth time, but I can't say it stokes my fire like it used to. The Wager by David Gran. This is a story of the British ship Wager that wrecked on the southern coast of South America in 1740, leaving all of these surviving sailors as castaways on a small island. Based on logbook entries from some of the crew members and information about the trials that followed, Gran brings to life the characters, events, and settings as the shipwrecked sailors struggle to persevere in the face of starvation, disputes, and insurmountable odds. From this crew of castaways, 2 groups form, and each lives to tell the tale. Fast forward a couple years, and they've returned to England for the trial, but the story each group shares is riddled with inconsistencies when put up against the other. 4 dog ears for this one. I like it because it gives you a minor role as judge and jury during the story. You have to kind of decide for yourself, who was responsible for the wreck? Was a mutiny warranted? Did a murder take place? And what consequences should the remaining sailors face? Read it and see if you agree with how the tale ends. To Be Taught, If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. In a nutshell, this book is about astronauts exploring different worlds and changing their physiology to suit the alien environments. That means waking up from cryo with a new look each time. In a neat way that Chambers separates these missions is that each long chapter is set on a different planet. The astronauts receive updates from Earth as they're in transit, which sometimes can take decades. So they have a lot to learn about what's happening at home when they wake up. Until the Earth stops sending updates. It goes completely quiet. So the deep space explorers have to decide what to do. Head back home or continue their mission. 4 dog ears. The planets were each unique, as were the flora and fauna that the astronauts encountered at each stop. But what really hooked me about this book is that overarching story of what's happening back on Earth. And I liked how the book resolves that conundrum in the end. Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. Like I've mentioned before, I do like to occasionally read a financial self-help kind of book, and this is one of those. So I'm just going to rapid fire throw out some things that I learned. This book suggests that investing in experiences means accumulating special memories, and when you're older, that's often more meaningful than the dollar amount you have in the bank. Especially if you've been able to reminisce with others about those memories throughout the years, increasing your enjoyment of them over time. It can be as simple as a game night with your family or as big as that bucket list backpacking trip through Europe. One of the key takeaways for me was to spend money when you're younger and able to on activities like hiking Mount Kilimanjaro. Don't hold on and try and do that when you're 85. It's not going to happen. This book is a good reminder for those who save that you can go wrong when going in that Scrooge direction where you spend your entire life accumulating wealth, but then when you're 70, you haven't had the experiences, travel that you've wanted to, and you're no longer able to. And I gave this one 5 dog ears. If you're interested in the FIRE movement at all, which is financial independence, retire early, or any kind of financial know-how, this is a good one to read. You may not completely agree with the author's perspective, but it gives you another interesting angle to look at. We Are the Weather by Jonathan Safran Foer. It may not say so under the title, but this is basically a sequel to the author's other book, Eating Animals, which I read a couple years ago and enjoyed. This one takes a slightly different approach, arguing that the best way for humans to battle climate change and preserve a healthy, habitable planet is to eat less meat. No longer eating animal products is the most immediate action we can take to make a positive impact on our planet. The author suggests at a minimum that people stick to a no meat before dinner mentality. And that seems like a good starting point because it's a reasonable ask. Foer doesn't expect everyone to go vegan, but transitioning to a more plant-based diet benefits both the earth and our health. This one gets 4 dog ears from me. It's inspiring, but it's also a bummer. The picture Foer paints is that we can either transform our own planet, which has everything we need on it, or move to a new planet, where it's likely to be much more difficult. Obviously, one of those options seems way more doable at this point. This book reinvigorated my desire to eat a vegetarian diet as much as possible. It's a habit that can be tough to get into and easy to break, but I plan to try my best. Sometimes you just need a book like this to serve as motivation, a good kick in the shorts, you know? There you have it, the highs and lows of my August 2023 reading journey. Remember to like, subscribe, and let me know what you thought about these books in the comments if you've read them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Happy reading.